Then something just snapped. Something inside of me. No, no more! That's it! I don't care! I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about being better than Kakarot. I didn't care about being a Super Saiyan. I didn't care if I lived. I didn't care about anything. And then it happened.
Okay, this was a minute ago. I want to make sure that I can still get those thought patterns that I had, even though I'm not as so fresh on the material. But I'm always talking to my friends about this stuff. Crazy person, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind.
Well, Zach, that's a good place, I think. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll tell a little anecdote of what we're doing and why
Okay.
we're doing it again.
Okay, so I'm Zach Shumar, Zachary, whatever. I am just a nobody on Twitter. I like to post nonsense. I rarely ever post, to be honest. But I just wanted to go over Tracy Twyman because she's a very interesting character. She wrote some very great books. She has a very brilliant mind, and I think that her story should be looked at, and the details should be categorized, and we should pay attention to what she was saying because she was on to some things. Not to get into anything crazy, but she was very ahead of her time, I guess, is the way to phrase it.
I'll tell that my anecdote. About 5 months ago, we started messaging, and you said, I had Joe on. Joe Nally came on my show, and he went to Temple. And you,
Yes.
I don't want to dock to you, but he
Oh, I did it the first one. I did say I went to Temple for business.
So we started talking about what kind of research you were interested in, particularly, and I'm very excited about Twyman. And not the first person to tell me about Twyman, but by far the most professionally oriented, in that you sent me a Google Drive with your notes. You could see how extensively you had treated it and carefully. And since Twyman was new for me, not new in the sense that I'd never heard of her, but it was new for me in the sense I'd never looked at it in
material,
serious.
yeah.
Right. And I told you this, and then I said, well, why don't you come and present this? Because I think it'll be interesting, maybe magical experiment, if you present it to me and I'll react to it for the first time. So we actually did that, and it turned out really great. But we did have some technical issues, and I will just shout out that I have had some issues, but not just with you. It was also with Monty and with BD. So, it happens, and part of it's my fault, and I acknowledge that. But Zach was awesome enough to come back, and even though it's not as fresh, I think that this time around, at least, I will be able to bring my perspective will be a little more thoughtful, because I have had more experience with it.
You did ask me some questions where I have ruminated on my responses and would like to add, not qualifiers. Donald Rumsfeld, his quote in the 90s or whatever was of the unknowns. There's known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. There's all these different things that, I personally might not think of, but it doesn't mean that it's not true, and it's not like a fact that should be acknowledged, but it just might not be aware to me. So that's like a couple of the questions I wanted to at least add some little qualifiers that there could be other explanations for these things, but I just might not be privy,
It's interesting, this material, for me too, because it is so outside of my natural realm of East Asian and Himalayan esoterica, or the derivative pop culture that arise from Asia. But what I like about all the Twyman material, and especially the material that you presented, was it makes a lot of sense to me. The narrative that she tells from even her very early days, where you call it quote unquote fiction, there's a thread there that I think that you really pulled at, and I saw for the first time. And so I think that we will be able to capture it. I have full faith in you, and I will not let you down with this one.
Yeah. See, like that's also what's very interesting about her is because she started off with fiction, or I should say, fictionalized facts
Mhm.
with the Priory of Zion, where she was taking factual things and remixing them with her own ideas and kind of building her own lore, like almost a LARP before LARPs were things.
Mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
then this built her initial following with Dagobert's Revenge, I think. But yeah, that was the magazine, the zine, I guess that you would say. And I also want to like preface that, like, I mean, sure, I'm bringing all this research to the table, but like 95% of this research was done by Tracy, and I'm reiterating what she was saying and bringing attention to what she was saying. There's a few different things, and I think you know which ones I'm talking about, where like, oh, that's I figured that out myself. I was looking that up for a separate thing. But most of the stuff is pretty much straight from at least the first section that we're going to go over on the Temple Mysteries. That's pretty much all. You could find videos of her going exactly over this, or you could pick up her book and you'll find exactly what I'm saying here. This is not my research. This is her research. I'm just saying it, I guess, in lieu of her being here to say it for herself.
It is interesting too that you say that, because even though I agree with you, I'm not diminishing that it is, but it is kind of your own presentation. And that's what I thought was really interesting initially, was that you did you appreciated it enough to say, this is my view, and maybe I put it together in this way, but this is really her work and I'm representing it.
Mhm.
But I found you to be very open-minded narrator, especially when I would discuss metaphysical ideas related to her and related to her work, and not taking it as a non-fictional layer. And I don't think she specifically wrote fiction. I would put quotes around it, because she's narrating a magical journey. That's honestly how I would describe it now. And this is something magicians often do, because the magician and a bard or a storyteller, those aren't different things. Those are maybe not the same thing, but there is a layer of synthesis and art that happens in magic as well. So there's different, maybe, personifications a magician can take. And
Yeah,
I
I think
think
it's like a different medium of telling a story. They're both
yes,
telling a story, but it's through a different medium.
yes, yes, very well said. Okay, sorry, Zach, I'll let you on. I won't
Oh,
interrupt you.
no, you're
But
good. You're good. Okay, I guess we'll start here. Tracy Twyman reminder. People are hyper litigious around this. I gotta state, I'm a third party. No claims are being made. This is just inquiry. It's just a story. I'm just trying to lay out some facts that are present in the public domain. You can find this stuff yourself. The first story we're going to be going over is the Temple Mystery. This is basically, it's all about her book, Baphomet, Temple Mystery Unveiled. This is co-authored with Alexander Rivera. Remember, um, great book. Highly recommended. It's very interesting, very detailed. It we'll just get right into it. Okay, so what she does is she goes and she discovers the myths and the tangents to modern occultism, similar to what Cappy describes, which leads her to a strange suicide along with Cappy. And this could all be, LARP. This could all be fictionalized. It doesn't matter necessarily. This is what was presented to the public. The Temple Mysteries themselves are of particular interest because what is depicted on the supposed Templar artifacts are obscene sexual rites and sacrificial offerings to the deity Meat or Met, Mete, often translated to wisdom in some circles, whereas Baphomet is understood to be baptism of wisdom in certain circles as well. These rites were even at least tacitly confirmed by the Chinon parchment where Pope Clement V absolved the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, specifically the absolved portion, because this implies that there was a sin that was committed that required repentance. I like to start this because a lot of the verbiage that goes around and adjectives that are used to describe the Templars are a very positive light. Everybody loves the Templars. They're a great force for good in the world, at least is what we're to understand. And I just want to say that that could be true, but also you have to take the good with the bad. and that this is also where uh, Catholicism kind of plays a part in this, because there is that repentance where you can be forgiven, and that's good. That's a good thing. But we can't forget that the sin was committed, is more or less where I come to this. I'm saying, yes, you can be forgiven, but this is what you did. We can't whitewash that. Okay. And so the two groups that I put this in here is people that don't want to talk about this, and there's other groups that I could add to this of people that just aren't interested, which that's in its own case. But people that don't want to know what it is, don't want to look into someone practices ritual magic, they're terrified of that, is the first category. And then the second category is that I would say is people that don't want to have those rituals revealed, who I would call like initiates. But also there's other groups to this, so I don't want to like lump everybody into A or B. But
I think that's a good division. We discussed this a little before, but I never considered Baphomet to be the evangelical interpretation, nor did I consider him to be some like edgelord Satanist, cool God guy. I've always been very neutral with Western esotericism and how I personally approached it. And I also could see instantly that it wasn't evil with a capital E or whatever.
yeah,
I could see it wasn't like that. So I think in my experience that I've learned is that your perception of things is not always correct. And I like that you are demystifying it right away.
yeah, and that's and like because that's the thing too is I mean growing up I was very interested in dark stuff, like just being around like heavy metal and stuff, you're going to see all of these different esoteric symbols and things that are, would be quote unquote dark to a Catholic or Christian. And yes, that I will say that yeah, there is a tinge of darkness to it. There are certain things to that, but it's trying to spook the other side. They're doing it to incite. So part of the negative that surrounds it is the reaction that people have to it. You know what I'm saying?
You're totally correct, and I think that is the first, if you want to call it the first trap, is
Yeah.
the black and white checkerboard. If you want to use a Masonic,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. There you
symbolism.
go. That's
Yeah,
perfect for it.
and so like I think to approach it properly is a middle. You have to take a more moderated approach. It's not extremely dualistic. You're just looking at the material, looking at the facts.
Yeah, trying to stay away from the Hegelian, trying to just look at
Exactly.
there.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay. Okay, so what went on? A Templar was kicked out. This Templar goes to the King of France with cases of these blasphemous rituals, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and bizarre sexual rites. They also would take a oath, or actually, I'll pull that in later. But they would rarely had sex with prostitutes, and when they did, they would abort and kill the fetus. At least this is what was said at the time. Could be false, could be not. They were basically accused of witchcraft. The King of France puts them on trial and tortured into confessing quite a lot. The confessions were constant among the accused. Okay, so this is the first confession where they are tortured. Okay, and this is to the King of France. And then after this, the Pope then also interrogates them, and they confess again to the same accusations, but this time without torture. The same confessions, no torture. Several were executed, and a few of them had remained and joined other orders. I think the Knights Hospitalier, and I might be completely wrong on that. There was a couple other orders that they dispersed into and joined, but they still had to do a penance. Even if they joined another order, they still had to do the penance if they weren't executed. The king was in control of the papacy, or at least this was, what Tracy was saying. The king was in control of the papacy and pressured, if not caused, the papacy to intervene and disband, which was considered a wrongful prosecution by some. Which, this is what 700 some hundred years ago that we're all up in the air about this. It's hard to understand what actually went down. You know,
No,
it,
you're
it just
totally right.
yeah, it just seems there was a lot of data supporting one side. And then in 2001, okay, while working for the Vatican, a woman by the name of Barbara Frail wrote a book, The Templars, The Secret History Revealed. She found the Chinoan parchment, which outlines the Pope's trials of the Templars. And the Chinoan parchment was held in the Vatican at the time. So that's how she got a hold of it, because she was working in the Vatican. They confessed to homosexual acts, initiations, and oaths, not to have sex with women, and not to deny your brother's sexual advances. Didn't discuss the ritual sacrifice, though, oddly, in the Chinoan parchment, so that was left out. And then in 2007, the Vatican begins talking about this publicly. So the book wasn't actually released, but in 2001 is when she started to work on it. And then in 2011 is when she actually released the book. So that's how the parchment was to be discovered, because the Vatican had it. It was only the Vatican that had it for so many years. So basically, pre-2011, if anybody were to have any ideas about the Templars and these bizarre rituals and rites, it could be explained as fiction, because there's no prima facie evidence for it. Isn't that the right word? Prima facie? Whatever. No first-person source of it. Well, here is a first-person source of it provided through the Vatican, who is, reputable depending on what sect of society you are, I guess. But
the Vatican are definitely part of it. I think that what I struggle with, not with your series, but in general, as maybe an overarching, a meta idea, is that how much certain organizations connected with other organizations, and who is really, I don't want to say in charge, because I don't think it's quite like that. I think it's warring factions at all times, and sometimes we see it more.
yeah. And what I would say with, yes, they are warring factions, but they don't want to completely destroy the framework. They just want to be at the head of the framework.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you could get into different conversations of what other factions are trying to destroy the framework, which I don't think the people I don't think either or any of these groups that actually hold substantial power want to destroy the framework. They just want to manipulate it. They want to be the manipulator of it. Yeah, because that's the thing, is there are a lot of connections to a lot of these different things, and half of them could be circumstantial or just kind of luck of the draw stuff, and other things that connection is very, very important for something that happens 5-10 years down the line.
That's kind of that's what I realized, especially Tracy, in terms of her career as a researcher, that arc of people and what we're doing now, maybe in a very small way. I think that being an archivist, at least of ideas, is going to be really interesting in 5 or 10 years. Not that people will listen to this in that long, but I think it's interesting because so much even has changed since 2020. So much has even changed since 2022. And even the way conspiracy people are framing things, more mainstream ones, as we talked about, and there's like a whole new crop of them now. And like the choices they make in what material to expose or not expose, I think that people who've watched it, I know you're very hawkish in the sense that you look at everything, you're a little detached, and but you appraise it in a broader way. And
yeah, I'm always trying to look at all data that's available to me, and usually I'm trying very hard to not come to conclusions. Like very, very much so. I'm trying not to come to conclusions, because that I do know that I don't know I don't know everything. So I can't really develop a conclusion to something when I don't have all the information available. And it's pretty much impossible to have all the information available to you. And that's where we're starting to build language models, like large language models. We're trying to have all the information available to us at the fingertips, but that's an impossible task. We like at least this is where I come into my mind, is the religious circles are straining for the infinite through spirituality, whereas the scientific circles are straining for infinite through technology. And neither one is ever going to get there, but it's that constant struggle on both sides of them trying to attempt to meet the infinite that we're creating all these backlashes and destructive circles and thought patterns, is because we keep attempting to think that we can control the infinite when we can't. It's impossible. At least in my mind, that's just how I think.
No, I mean that's you cannot control it. It's beyond our. It's so beyond of what we're capable of. Great things, and I
Very
truly
much so.
believe that. And I truly believe that magic can be, if you want to call it magic. Obviously, I usually refer to it as theurgy, and that is my preferred word. But I'm going to call it magic for just the plebes. I think it can
This
be
trains to
utilized. It can be utilized for good and for making yourself into a better vessel in the world, and it also improves the external circumstance, but that isn't the goal. And I think that has been very clear to me, that people who are very Luciferian, right? You go towards something no matter the cost, and you must know the truth behind it, the secret truth behind it. And I'm like that in some ways, but I do believe that there is a cost. And when we discussed Baphomet several other times, is that I always call him the god of equivalent exchange. Yes, transmutation.
Yeah.
He is. Yeah, he stands at the gateway, and you have to pay the tollman. It's not a free for all.
Yes.
Right? And
Yeah,
so,
there it is right there. Nothing is free. And there's a cost to all of this. And I think that's why we're in a certain scenario right now globally. There are costs to these actions that we're doing.
100%.
And nobody acknowledges the costs on all sides.
On all
Not
sides.
this is not a political thing either way. Nobody is acknowledging the costs that are occurring.
I think the idea of revelation of the method in order to change their personal karma. So I was very against Michael Hoffman for a long time. Since I've ever been into conspiracies, I was like, that's not really how karma works. And it's not really how karma works, because you have to buy into the illusion fully. If the thing is it would only alleviate their karma so much as if that you were illuminated enough to see past the illusion and accept it anyway. That's the only way it really would work. If you really want to put a Buddhist ontology onto it, it's a little more complicated, but I think that his formulation of revelation of the method is interesting. But I think it's 70% truth, 20% misdirection, 10% incorrect, whether intentionally or not intentionally. So I think that that's also interesting in the
Yeah.
context to our conversation.
And I almost even think that ties into what we were saying before we started about the alleviating pressure, or or creating these humiliation rituals and how they're used. How you're saying, right? There's different percentages, a different percentage breakout of the possibilities in it. This is how these humiliation rituals or pressure campaigns are used on people, and it's to see how that they handle the pressure. So what we said, it's a test. It's a test to see if they can um, take that negative and turn that into a positive.
Yes, yes. And there's something that was very metaphysical about that as well. The idea of the caltropes, I'll use the same allegory I spoke to you. It's a good one. If you're the path of magic is being on the path of a mason in some ways of thinking. You see this black and white checkerboard in front of you. You're trying to move forward. You're trying to ascend up the staircase, but the staircase is further away from you. You have to cross the board first. This idea is that you will leave metaphysical traps behind for people who are not worthy of the path. This is not something that Buddhists do intentionally, but there's an idea of the skillful means. So you can encode something that you say in a mistruth, but it is also mostly true. And it, depending on your level of understanding, you will either see through the trap or you won't. What you said was that these situations are created in front of them. How they maneuver around it is what's assessed, rather than it's not so magical. It's not so planned. It's not so fixed. There's more room for the game to be played. in front of
Yes.
us.
They're expecting a reaction and they want the appropriate reaction.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that they're going to get that reaction,
That's right.
because there's still the agency on the I mean, you could say victim or initiate.
Well, and that's the thing. What is the difference between those two things a lot of times?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I come back to this, is a lot of these groups and sects, or and cults is obviously the one that everyone would go to. A lot of these things are indoctrination campaigns. There's not really a nice way to put it. Obviously, you're forming community and you're developing friendships and long-lasting relationships, but those could also be used against you. You see what I mean? And I think that's kind of how the Masons, at least in their pop culture view, how they're seen as being controllers of everything, and they're manning the board, they're ruling the world. It's like, well, no, but not just no, but not just yes. There's there's portions of this that are true, and there's portions that are not.
No, 100%. And I think that is a really good place to sort of refocus back on Tracy. Is that I think I mentioned this with my episode with Dan, but I collect, not now, but I formally collected vintage Masonic ritual items for my own personal altar when I practice magic. But it's not because those things I'm inherently a Mason. I'm definitely not a Mason of any kind.
But you understand that they have power.
Yes, it's symbolic power. It doesn't even need to be a ritual power that someone's like, like sacrifice a sheep. I mean, I would never do that. But I'm just giving an example. It doesn't have to be consecrated in their method, but it has a psychological and also esoteric power, because if you believe it has power, yes, that means something that does have power.
Yeah,
And
I think that's where a lot of it comes in.
Yes, and Tracy was, I think, and signaling in the way that magicians usually get very big egos, or not even ego, but it's a little signal. You're doing a little transgression. You're saying, oh yeah, I know a little bit about this shit. Like, yeah, I'm gonna do magic too. And I think that is sort of was her ethos. Listening to her now and you doing the series, she had this rebellious, I don't want to call it anarchist, but it's a little, I'm gonna stir things up.
Yeah, I could see that as like a chaos agent kind of thing.
But it's not necessarily
not
bad.
like it, not yeah, not like in a
positive.
negative. I didn't mean it in like a negative.
No, it didn't sound negative. I want to make sure that people don't think that.
Yeah, it's like stirring the pot. Like stirring the pot necessarily isn't a bad thing, but also it can be a bad thing if there's a bad reaction. The Chernobyl Parchment with Barbara Frail. She released the book 2000. It was presented as the Templars being absolved by the Vatican and the papers. Pope Innocent, or not Pope Innocent. They were innocent, not just absolved, at least in this book. The papers didn't mention what was confessed to in her book. They wanted to make the Pope look like he was manipulated by France, but it was the Vatican that initially chartered the Templars. Okay, so that's where I like to start it there, because the Vatican was the first person or the first group to charter the Templars. So they are responsible for it. And that's why I think there's been a lot of whitewashing on this, is because the Vatican does know that they would be the end all be all of the responsibility factor here. And they're trying to push this away so that we can use the veneer of the Templars again, because it was a very good thing in the Crusades, would it make the Pope lose France? But it was the Vatican initially charged at the forefront of the Crusades for 200 years while this was supposedly occurring. And the Templars were supposedly commingling with the Muslims in the area, and this is how a lot of their, or at least how several of their rituals or at least were seen to come about. You could see in some of the, if you were to get her book, or you could probably search Templar artifacts, and you'll see statues and old writings that would be in Arabic. So there would be language on it that's Arabic. So it's coming from the East, or at least it was a meshing of the East and West.
encourage everyone to also go read the Owen Davies book on the history of grimoires, because
Mm.
it does lay a groundwork for this post-Templar grimoire publishing, and how the first grimoire to make it to the West was the Armadale, the Picatrix, and this other one that is not well known, which is called the Book of Wonders, which is just called El Kitab, which just means the book, but it is the proper title I don't remember in Persian or Arabic. But it's really interesting because they say some things in these early Arabic texts that are not discussed almost at all in Western esotericism, but that are very well known in Himalayan Tantra. I think that's really interesting that you made that point.
Yeah, and I could almost see this as laundering ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes these ideas wouldn't be accepted in this society, so
Mm-hmm.
we will reframe it so that those ideas can be accepted in that society.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's about the skill of the magicians that are put, or whatever you want to call them, religious
Yes,
practitioners that are putting it together. But then
to
I
see
also
if
think,
it works.
yes, to see if it works, like if they can make it work in this synthesis, in this very alchemical process. Yeah, exactly. Like if they can make it work over here in Prague or Vienna or whatever, and they're making it work in Nepal, it should work if it's a wisdom science, right? That's the idea,
Hmm.
that it's testable and provable.
Yeah,
But I think that's, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but I do think that's sort of what Tracy was getting at.
I think so too. I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that most of these ideas that we have are laundered through different things because they're not acceptable in this one over here, but they're acceptable over here. We'll put a new coat of paint on it,
Mm-hmm.
and people will see it in a different light so that it will be perceived differently, and then it could be interpreted differently, and then everyone's going to either support it or regress against it. That could go many different ways with many different cultures. The point being is that they confessed and they were forgiven. That's the crux of it. They confessed to these blasphemous acts and were forgiven. Baphomet was said to be a head or the head. There were multiple ones, supposedly multiple different heads, and that they worshipped in their rituals. Various descriptions of this head were a bust of a bearded head, a bust of a Janus head, a mummified human head, and a skull with engravings on it. These were supposedly used for divination of their patron god, Baphomet. It would speak to them, it gave them wisdom, it made them rich, and it made their crops grow. This is what they've said. And I don't know if I put it in here in my I don't think I put it in my notes, but what they would, or at least what I've read, is they would write out spells onto little pieces of parchment and then roll it up and put it into the mouth of the head to start the ritual. And that would make or supposedly the head would spring to life and start speaking to them and relaying different knowledge that cannot be confirmed. But then we'll jump a little bit forward whenever it starts to be talked about in esoteric circles. I think, was it 1808 or no, 1818? Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall wrote a book in Latin called the Mysterium Baphometum Revelatum. And in this book, he supposedly had found some Templar artifacts at old Templar sites, and he drew little comic depictions of what they looked like in his book. They were caskets, bowls, coins, and idols with depictions of some of the idols on some of the other items. So there would be pictures of the idols on the coins, on the bowls, and on the caskets. And the idols were obviously the important thing if they're being put onto the other. Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall described Baphomet as a humanoid with horns and hermaphroditic. JHP claims that this idol was Baphomet, or Meat, Mete, similar to Cybele. Then several years later, Eliphas Levi, a few years later, I think 1854 and 1856, wrote a book called Dogme et Ritual de Haute Magique, Dogma and Rituals of High Magic, what it is, where he includes his own interpretations of Baphomet, which he calls the Sabbatic goat, in which, and in an image, he drew himself, which is the iconic version of the devil card that you'll see in all the tarot decks.
Mhm.
Baphomet became the patron god of most occult orders at this time in the late 18 to early 1900s. Freemasons, OTO, which translates to Order of Oriental Templars. Aleister Crowley founded OTO and calls himself Baphomet or Baphomet reincarnated. So he's tying it into to those ancient traditions of the Templars. He calls himself Baphomet. It's just more situational evidence.
I think with Crowley is that he was such a shithead. Sometimes it's difficult to know. I think he codes his materials as well. And I know Nick from Occult Rejects, he is really into this idea that Crowley did not mean what he said he meant. And I agree with that. I'm not simping for him or anything. I'm not a Telemite in any way, but I actually have come over to this opinion because I realized that some of the things he was saying was quite deep. Now, do I think Crowley himself wrote it? Probably not. I think a lot of theosophists were actually using his name, pseudo Solomon. I'm not saying he didn't write any of it.
Well,
I'm just
I've never even considered that, to be frank.
a lot of grimoires are like that. Pseudo Solomon or pseudo Agrippa. That's
Yeah.
quite common. Sometimes I wonder because to map, and I don't always agree. That's the other thing with Tolima is that because of my own, I guess, tradition and my own ideas, my own way of thinking, when I look at like a Liber 7/7 or Liber Resh, like, yeah, some of the things, of course, make sense, but there's other ritual components where I would not do in that order. But I wonder if that's because I look at it more from maybe a more experienced lens. And someone who is looking at it for the first time is going to take it more literally. How some people take the Bible very literally, but some people take it very metaphorically. More of this greater metaphysical story inside yourself, in the world, and somewhere in the out in the universe. It's like
Yeah, it could
right.
almost be kind of like an early irony poisoning where you're saying things that you don't really mean,
Mhm,
but they're so potent of an
mhm,
idea that it's creating a very negative reaction, even
mhm.
just because you were trying to make a joke. And I see that all the time, and that's why it's very hard to see who's being genuine. I wanted to remember to bring up channeling because it was really funny at the time because I was watching a Sparrow show because I said something about it to you because we were talking about channeling
Oh,
and was Austin Osman Spare.
yes. Okay. Okay. Yes, I
He
remember
was
this.
yeah, so I just thought it was very coincidental that they were talking about channeling and then I just had watched something on the first person to supposedly start channeling or at least coin that phrasing. I didn't want to leave that out because I thought it was interesting.
No, it is really interesting.
And Jenna's Sparrow's podcast is very good. You should check it out. She's pretty good. But Baphomet, Aleister Crowley, okay, Gnostic groups. Gnostic groups, specifically the Ophite Gnostics, were supposedly engaging in this, where they would say they shouldn't procreate. The creator God isn't the highest God. They're locked in a prison searching for escape. These Ophite Gnostics were engaged in these same rituals. Kissing the behind of an animal or other members is typical of initiations. Very deviant sexual rites as well that involved children, animals, and this wasn't her phrase. This was her dissecting of the phrase. Because the phrase that was used a lot by the Ophites was the distinguished charity of meat uproots the enemy, and how she described this as charity, meaning peculiar love of meat, uproots the enemy, and what she interpreted peculiar love or charity, which she says means peculiar love, would be brotherly love or sexual love. So what their spiritual idea is that strange sexual rites were the way to conquer the demiurge or the creator god.
This makes a lot of sense to me because I'm quite fond of like the wisdom goddesses from Tantra, and I often
Mhm.
post a lot about it. And so this is an idea with Shiva or Bhairava. is that he must be lithophilic or erect in certain circumstances. And so the cosmic cycle is only created through this procreative act, but sometimes the act isn't just for procreation, sometimes it is also for magical purposes. So even though Tantra is called this antinomian sexual religion, it's really not. I mean, yes, there are transgressive practices, but I think in the overarching terms, it is really about heterosexual intercourse between the man and his consort. So it's not as antinomian as the way you're describing it, which is, but in some ways I understand what they're thinking is that they're taking away the normative, the conventional, the sky and the earth sort of idea.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's levels to the transgression.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
These are their at least these are their attempts to quote unquote destroy and overturn the archons and the demiurge, which they believed would destroy the whole world. So this is their little contrived. That's a mean way of saying. This is their spiritual idea. This is what they've developed or they developed at the time.
I
And
think though, sorry to interrupt you.
oh, get it.
This is a very old idea, what they would say anti-cosmic Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
Is like a 218 current or 128 current. They call it Babylonian anti-cosmic Gnosticism. It's very contemporary magic. It's a very transgressive left-hand path ritual work, and it's ideas too that are disseminated into the occult world. But this idea of inverting the natural order into liberating us from the demiurge is what they say, or it could be just regular God. They don't necessarily have to think of it as a demiurge. It's just God, and we don't like that father figure, so we're going to invert it, and so he's destroyed. And that makes a lot of sense in context to what I know about contemporary Satanism. A lot of them are into Kali worship, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative at all. I'm just saying it. I can see where they're are
worshiping the
70%.
left-hand path of it.
Yes, exactly.
Forgetting the right-hand path.
Exactly. There's no balance in it. There's no what metaphysical repercussions will this have, rather than, oh, we're just going to do it this way and we're going to think of it in this very specific way. It's a truth, but it's also a mistruth. It's both at the same time. I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. But yeah, that's more or less how I'm seeing this. Is like there's different groups that are taking these same ideas, like I said earlier, and putting a new, different paint job on them, and they're reusing them.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go back to the Templars and just discuss the Templars for a moment, because the Templars were chartered to protect pilgrims going to the Holy Land. Later, they would be special forces in the Crusades. They started preceptories, or they would make their own walled cities all over Europe, where you could deposit your money and you were given a chit. Now, the word chit, this is where the word check comes from nowadays. And I think I talked about this in our first time, and I was like, this is how I necessarily got into looking in this, because Tracy has another book on this, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, where some of this is hashed out a little bit, but it was more so hashed out in Baphomet, at least in relation to the Templars, because I've always been fascinated with how money works and whatnot. So that's really what got me interested in this, because this is basically the founding of international banking, and then what they did afterwards is kind of oh my god, I'm blanking on the word, fractional reserve banking. This is like the start of fractional reserve banking, where you would take in $100, keep $10 of it for your bank balance, and then loan out the other 90%, so that you would be able to make, or supposedly make, interest on it. But that's not necessarily the point of it. It's just you're putting out more money you're inflating the money supply, is basically what's going on. And I think this is one of these magical techniques that has been used for a long time. And magical, sure, whatever you could say. Yeah, it's magic to an extent. I went to business school. It was magic. They're teaching you magic. They're teaching you how to convince somebody to buy something that they don't want.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely magic. It's just that people have this idea that magic is this thing you do in like a dark room with candles, but
No.
that's not really magic at all. That's just one part of the ritual.
If
That's
anything, that's just the ceremonial magic.
Yes, exactly. You got it. So
Yeah.
it's magic is also is so much about perception and what people perceive you to be saying, doing, or you're making them feel a certain way through their own perception. So they're kind of buying in. They have to in a way. And so that is really what magic is where you change someone's perception so much that it influences how they understand reality. That's all magic really is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I said you'd give them your money, they'd give you a chit. This was an encoded balance that as you traveled from preceptory to preceptory, they would deduct the money that you spent, and at the end of your journey, you could withdraw the remaining balance. This is the genesis of modern banking, like I just said. I believe Baphomet keyed them into this. Okay, so this is where I would like to put an asterisk on this because when we first did this, I left it at that I believe Baphomet keyed them into this, which could be true, but I also I wrote it down here because I want to make sure I get exactly what I said on it. It's also possible that it wasn't the entity that gave them this knowledge, but the psychological state that these dehumanizing rituals would put these initiates into that would make it easier to dehumanize others. This is the more scientific explanation for it. But I like to say that as dehumanizing others because if you ask me, and using fractional reserve banking is a very dehumanizing tactic. You're dehumanizing the populace. You're saying they're not worth, what the money is worth because they're now allotted less, in percentage-wise, less of it. That's where I get into. Sure, it could have been. I will say it could have been that Baphomet was this entity that taught them this stuff, but it also could have been that they were so in such a dehumanized state that they could see themselves ripping people off in such a blatant manner. You know what I mean?
No, I think that's a really great observation, and I'm so glad you brought in this kind of more um, historical materialism view on it because I think that that's exactly right. But I think that there's also this other layer with doing the antinomian transgressive things. Like it could seem like a spirit is speaking to you. I can seem like a
Mm-hmm.
spirit is speaking through you.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean it is, and it doesn't necessarily mean, I think we spoke about this the first time, is that doesn't necessarily mean the spirit is what it says it is.
Yeah, that's another thing is the deception part of it. That these entities could be lying to you entirely. It could be all they could be just stringing along a thread until you finally give up on it or you drive yourself mad. And I could see that entirely, but I just like to state it that way because it makes it more palatable to people that aren't so deeply that don't go deep diving into the more spiritual side stuff.
No, you're right, and I am an esoteric bro, so I appreciate it more from the metaphysical angle. But I think that the material angle is what kind of roots it. It kind of says this is what you're seeing in front of you. This is kind of the secret trick behind it. And once you see through the trick, it shouldn't be as meaningful anymore. So I think that layer is you cannot discard any of the layers, but in particular for people like you said who aren't necessarily metaphysical, that's a very easy thing to sort of snap them out of a spell.
Even saying it as an entity would almost trigger a certain spell in certain people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
want to try to like demystify that so that I'm not spell casting quote unquote or whatever on them. I'm just trying to relay the information.
No, you're right to do so, and I think that what it is that because we had done a whole second part is that I think of like the other books, the other works, and I think of like some of the conceptual ideas she was talking about, and then I'm obviously thinking about what people are working on right now,
Right.
especially Dana and this idea of the process church, their theology, and how much the theology it all seems so similar. It seems like so familiar to me in terms of post 1947. But obviously, yes, we can push it back. We can say, okay, there was this time in the 12th century, there's this time in the 8th century. There's all these different moments where magic supposedly, or the system or the secret system, gathered together and then split apart. We can say that, yeah, sure. But I
Yeah.
think that there's something more contemporary about all this. There's a very post-war flavor, and someone in always talks about how, I think Corbett, maybe it's Drizzle from Grand Theft World, shout out to Drizzle, he always says wars are always used to reset the populace, reset their popular imaginary. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that after
Well, because
post
it
47 there's
destroys the wars destroy the material, so you don't
exactly
have the material to even look on for reference.
exactly. So I just feel like it's so contemporary. And why does the process church seem to have these four quadrants to swastika?
Right, with these 4 turnings of these 4 different groups that switch
Exactly.
power.
Exactly. And then Theosophy talks about the four turnings. Even Steiner talks about the four turnings. Although there is a discrepancy whether we're going into the third turning or the fourth turning. Some Israelis often talk about the third temple, where we need to build the third temple. But if you're really counting it, the Al-Aqsa Mosque does actually count. And I'm not pro or anti either group. I've said it many times. I am just saying that if you're legitimately counting from a Kabbalistic perspective, the third temple's already happened. So we really are moving into the fourth temple period, or the fourth turning. And it's just interesting to me that there's so much reoccurrent theology, deep theology, but
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't always know
very
what they're
much.
talking about. You think that,
It
oh, it's just Judaism, or it's just Islam, or it's just this, but they're really not talking about those things. They're
Yeah,
talking about
they're talking over your head with a veneer of this spiritual, when what they're really talking about is how they're controlling the material.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, so what like we were saying, genesis of modern banking, Baphomet keyed into them, quote unquote, or this psychological aspect. Either one of these could be true, or there could also be an unknown claim to make them rich. But he basically told them about reserve banking, and or these rituals basically reserve banking. And in an alchemical analogy, especially considering the symbols that are on our current day money, it seems there was a link between them that's, you know, I wouldn't say, I guess I wrote undiscovered, but I wouldn't say undiscovered, but I would say less talked about or less acknowledged. Isaac Newton was comptroller of the currency in England and was also a practicing alchemist. So there are links, if not only coincidental, and I'm pretty sure, but I think it was Newton wrote more about philosophy and theology more so than he did about physics. I think more of his work was around philosophy. They kind of like toss out over half of his work in advance of just the scientific aspect of his alchemical work. So it's baby bathwater analogy, maybe that would fit. I don't know.
No, that's perfect. Am I allowed to use Kabbalah, Zach? Can I talk about it for a
Oh,
moment?
go for it.
Material science, not the theory of science, but the science TM, what happened in 2020, the institutional science that is at the sun. What Newton really was he was a wisdom scientist. His process was really taking place at Daat, or knowledge. And so it's a perfect false illumination to code him as a material scientist when he was really a natural philosopher or a wisdom.
Right.
And those two things are the same thing. That's very magical in and of itself, is that people in the occult world, we know that Newton was the full-on occultist. There was no
Very much so.
separation. People, they cope
Oh,
a lot about Newton.
yeah. How about the apple? I read about this recently. The Pythagorean cults supposedly would hand their initiates an apple, and they would say, "Here, all the keys of the universe are here. You just got to find them." And what they were basically telling them to do is cut it vertically and cut it horizontally, cut the apple vertically, cut the apple horizontally. You cut it horizontally, you see the 5-pointed star of the seeds in the center. You cut it vertically, you see the toroidal, or the magnetic field in the apple, how the apple grows out. And this was supposedly one of your, if you were to come to both of these conclusions, then you would be initiated into the first or second level of whatever initiation. I don't necessarily know how the frameworking of it went, but I read that made Newton seem even more occulted to me. Because there's where the apple comes into this. It hits him on the head. Oh, there's the knowledge. Now you know. It's not necessarily describing the gravity, but it's describing his understanding and coming to understanding as an aha moment.
Yes, exactly. And it's so interesting because when you consider apple trees are associated with Venus, because apples are in the rose family. So most rose plants, not all, but most rose plants are associated with Venus or nutsock. It's coming down into formation. It's a droplet from heaven, from the firmament above him. It's coming down, dropping on his head. It's red in color, but it has a white core. So if you think about it, it's very Babylon daughter in some ways. And the apple obviously has these connotations of the 5-pointed star, as you said. That's the 5 elements. I know that Western magicians generally discard either or Akasha or space or void, but in the real magical formulation, you can't really discard it. It exists. It's just something that's hard to produce. But I do think it's a magical story, and it also has the association with the, like when you said, the apple drops down and then the initiate has to see it and they cut it in half. Like, what is the first thing you see? My mind immediately went more of Buddhist direction, where it's like you see the seeds. So you have to plant the garden, like the famous book, The Garden of Pomegranates. There's layers, and people are missing it. They just think of him as a scientist. You're missing the point.
I'm trying not to draw conclusions because these things are so open-ended. There could be new things coming along. I could be missing certain things. Like, there's lots of layers to this stuff, and I feel like when people are drawing very, very big, stark conclusions, they're almost leading their followers, quote unquote, whatever you want to say, they're leading their people astray.
I agree with you. I'm very against this turn in some of the truther and conspiracy circles of saying everything is satanic or evil. And it's not because I am a Satanist secretly and I'm trying to, promote my ideology. It's because that by calling it the wrong name, it's a deliberate obfuscation. And how can you discuss what Satanism really is? If you want to talk about process theology, I want to have a real discussion about what their Satanism really means. And if there are multiple different kinds, I want to be able to parse the layers. But calling everything the same thing, no, you're just
it dilutes the word.
Exactly.
It's like when right-wingers see anything that they don't like on the left, it's communism. If the left wing sees anything on the right they don't like, it's fascism. You're doing the same thing. You are fueling the other side with your nonsense rhetoric.
I 100% agree, and we have never seen it. I mean, I have never seen it quite as stark as right now.
Seriously.
I think that the dialectic has to really split. It's honestly crazy. And it was around that one incident that was a couple weeks ago. But I just think, wow, to change places all of a sudden, to be the one who's skeptical of news and information and the media, and then to suddenly totally buy in.
It's a very good magic trick.
Yeah, really.
It really is. And not to say that I know, but the point is you could see the fruits of the labor. You see how all of these groups have now converged to only have this certain set of ideas, and if you are transgressive against those ideas, then you're on the other side and you're evil.
That's what's so weird to me, is that they flip the transgression, like especially because I'm a little more right wing. I wouldn't necessarily say I am, but maybe in the current landscape I am. They're so
Yeah.
sorry, Zach. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just gonna say that, like, I think the left wing, right wing thing is so played out at this point.
It
It's like
is. It really is.
are
But
you an authoritarian or are you not? I mean,
I'm
that's
not.
more or less what it comes down to.
100%. Well, okay, so I'm really a libertarian, but I'll just be honest. But I think that there is something where people on the right think that they're so sensitive to transgression.
You're trying to pick a side because you understand, or at least you think you understand, that things are converging in a right-left attack when that's not necessarily what's happening. But what you can do if you get high enough up on one of these right or left sides, then you are in the protected category. So it doesn't matter necessarily what you say on either side. And I think that's where most people are trying to climb that rung or play that Masonic chessboard, and they're trying to get to the other side to get to the steps.
There's actually a good point here about how especially like the figures that each side likes, say left hard kind of Twitter loves Stalin, and then you have the other side, the dissident right, esoteric fascist bros who love like Mussolini and the other guy, the H guy.
You know, tiny mustache
Yeah,
man.
it's a joke, right? Like it's a joke because both of them are like it's both.
Yeah, I mean, they all killed a bunch of people, dude. Like, I don't know how else you want to look at this.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I'm totally there. Obviously, neither is good. I don't. And there is an interesting idea actually that Sri Aurobindo discusses about how Stalin was a Asura and reborn in the human world, and Hitler was also, and that he would see a presence with Hitler on stage. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if I believe it.
And I also think it's interesting too. I mean, this is maybe this is my more lefty side coming out here, but like I think it's very interesting too that both the fascist and communist ideologies, okay, where did the ideologies come from? They didn't come from the lower castes.
No.
Okay, both of these ideologies came from the upper castes.
Yeah.
That's why. So why would the lower caste want to adopt the ideology of the upper class? At least that's where I come to it. Is you guys are telling me, or you know, because at least I think I'm in the lower caste. I don't actually have any idea where I sit in this. But if you're going to say that, yes, this ideology that's being presented by these people that have no relation to me and are in a completely different strata than me, and I'm going to somehow relate to that. How am I supposed to relate to that when I don't know? I mean, I do know what they're talking about, obviously, because I've read about it. But like, you know what I'm saying is like I don't have the same life scenarios that these individuals had. So it's really troubling, and it almost seems like a magical spell to get the lower rungs of society to adopt the ideologies of the upper rings.
I've been thinking a lot about this, about my personal orientation in terms of political ideas, and because a lot of libertarians have, I'm just going to be honest, for me at least, they have failed us during
Very much so.
They failed us with war issues. I don't want to be in any war. That's sort of my take, right? So I would just rather not pay for anything or foreign aid or anything. I'm very isolationist in that way, but I think that's probably better. But anyway,
I agree. I think there needs to be like a step back. Half of the population doesn't even understand that America's an empire. So it's like really difficult to get that through to certain people's heads. Like, yeah, we've got like over 800 different military bases across the planet. Do you not think that's going to start or spark some sort of animosity?
No, you're totally right, and I'm not even get rid of all of them. If you want some in North America,
Yeah, I'm not completely against military, but I also think that it's
way overburdening.
Yeah, and it's kind of arrogant to think that it doesn't lead or have effects in these areas.
No, you're 100% right, and this is something. This is what I want to say is that I think I'm a populist in that I like normal people. That is who I mostly identify with. So I just think it's interesting that what you're saying is that it's a trickle down ideology. And I always think is that all culture creation really is trickle down.
It's all top
It's
down.
very fake.
Very much. And I think that was a very good tangent there. I think we hit on some really important things there.
Agree.
So we were talking about Newton, the alchemist, quote unquote. So even John Maynard Keynes of Keynesian economics thought the majority of these alchemical manuscripts that were produced by Newton. It was a historical line of scientists procuring alchemical books from other scientists. So it's a continuation of it. And it's funny that it was Keynes. Okay, if you guys want to look into Keynes and his setup of the markets, go for it. It's interesting. I don't agree with it, but go for it.
Courtney Turner has done really good work on Keynes and how he was a crypto Fabian. I actually find her work quite interesting, even though I don't always agree with her conclusions.
So Baphomet matches up with, quote unquote, the other god in the Zohar as a hermaphroditic serpent that is a combination of Lilith and Samael. In Masonic literature, they describe him as the son of suns with U's on both of them, so the sun, and the moon of moons. So very Hegelian dialect. He's both at the same. This is the biggest power in most Western occultists. At least this is what is phrased. Anybody can make these contacts and form their own orders. So this is where I was saying that as long as you're doing these rituals, I don't care if you claim that you're the continuation of X, Y, or Z. If you're doing the rituals of X, Y, or Z, you are a continuation of it. There's it's just that's a retcon.
It's kind of a retcon. It's very neo-pagan. I don't know how much you know about that community. I don't know that much anymore, but reading a lot of these books, you can hear how much they sort of, I'm not saying that Christianity is the way or the answer, but I'm Christian friendly.
As am I.
Yeah, and I know you are too. I think that pagans do kind of retcon themselves. And I think this is where that stems from, is placing yourself in a historical identity. I'm not saying that they can't do it. I'm saying that it's not the same thing. It's not a broken, continued tradition, right? And I think that a lot of occult groups, especially left-hand path groups, I'm not just picking on pagans. It's really, this is all one thing. So they do this too. And they will say, we came from the Cainite, the Abel and Cain story, and we are the children of Cain, and we love she's the goddess of chaos, and we are her children. And okay, that might be true. I'm not discarding that in a spiritual way, but it doesn't mean that you're of them.
You could say I'm X, Y, and Z, but that doesn't mean that you are.
That's right.
And not to say that you aren't, but it's a quantum response where it is a possibility, but it's also a possibility that it's not. And where I see this stuff is like, if they're doing these pagan rituals and they can actually source material from these original rituals and they're doing those rituals, then yeah, I'd say they're a continuation. But I've never found anything to tie like modern pagans to like way back pagans. I've only just seen lore and theory around it.
It's not just about their particular religious tendency. It's about all of us, even for me, to look back on things that I was sure of that even happened 30 years ago. Now, after COVID, after everything, after we've been through so many psyops that are obviously, it's hard for me to look back on those things with the sort of concretized certainty that I would have before. And I was always skeptical. I was never mainstream. I was always a little bit conspiracy oriented, very metaphysically oriented. But now I would say that my reality has shifted enough that I would question almost all major events, like
very much so,
happening and when they were happening. And like George Bush Sr., I was really young, like 3 years old, I think, in 1991. But it's just crazy to think that he started this thing. They went through Iraq, they went through Kuwait, and what were they really doing? Yes, we can say it's about oil, and there's part of it that's true.
Right. And wasn't his name supposedly Magog in the Skull and Bones? Wasn't that like his name?
And then 9/11, and that seems like a breaking of the Kaaba, the Black Cube. And then you have George Bush and My Pet Goat's a very famous meme, obviously.
Yeah.
It's in reverse, but people think, oh, it's satanic. And yeah, sure, it is satanic from one perspective, but it's also Baphomet, how he appears in reverse, as well as
Yeah, I would even just say it's just transgressive. Try to
exactly.
just taking out the spell words, the things that make people trigger. It's just it's just a transgressive action. It doesn't, you don't need to put necessarily the ideology to it, but you can see that it's transgressive to the society that it's in.
This reminds me a lot of Manichaeanism, because this is how I got into not ancient history, but conspiracy oriented alternative history. Was I looked at the Manichaeans, who are not very well studied. It was a global cult for its time. And it had this idea of the transgressive at the Society of the Elect, which is also a term, interestingly enough, that they used in British Fabianism initially, was that they had used the same idea of the elect, and the nature of transgression changes depending on the nature of the society that it's in, but it also changes depending on how much they manage culture, because if they put the transgression in your face and you accept it, it's no longer
And it's
transgressive.
yeah, exactly. It's no longer transgressive. It's just been adopted into the society.
Exactly.
There need not be a direct line of progression as long as they are agreeing with the contract of Baphomet and they are continuing these rights. Which you could preface that with all we were saying before, and there's still points to it, but the point is that I think that there, as long as that you can draw a line with the same rituals, I think there's something to look at.
I agree.
And to be the patron of your order, as long as you are in contact with the outer head, quote unquote, you are continuing the tradition. So as long as you're doing these transgressive rituals and you're putting yourself in this psychological state of self-dehumanizing, you're continuing this tradition. It's almost a self-abuse that's perpetuated throughout history.
What if outer head could have, in Tantra, like we have the three dialectical meanings, inner, outer, secret. So when you're saying this outer head, I agree that it could mean the part of the Godhead that they think they are speaking to, totally, or in a psychological way of that being true.
Yeah,
But to me, there's also an element of spycraft, coded
absolutely.
outer head. Maybe that is not a metaphysical person. Maybe that's a person, and maybe they're the head of a different order,
Oh,
like Astrum
oh,
Argentum. And how a lot of
oh,
people
I
in
see what you
OTO
mean.
are Astrum Argentum, but
Or
they don't
how,
talk about it.
or how you could even go procession into Scientology.
Exactly. You're learning the multiple systems. It's almost like Tantra. You're doing the Indian style Tantra, then you might go the Goddess Tantra, and then you're going to do Buddhist Tantra because your one teacher gave you permission to study the text that gives you permission to study all texts.
Okay, yeah, that does make sense. So there's one of the unknown unknowns that I was speaking
Okay.
of. So the way I see this, and this is also how she phrased this, that the conspiracy is a spiritual conspiracy, and that these entities or these rituals inspire people to do certain things. That's where I'm trying to tie in. It's not just A, it's not just B, it's not just C. It could be a combination of all three, or it could just be one of these individuals. But since I don't know, I have to leave that open.
I like that you're leaving it open ended, and I will too. But I think that there is something to that. We are in a spiritual battle, and it's what you said. It's depending on how high you ascend, and there are not just the right and left pillars. Obviously, there are multiple different games going on in the same playground that we all live in,
And the
and
secret third.
the secret third thing, of course. And but that I love the secret third thing because I think that's the magician's way. That's
Yeah.
the way to get out of the little dialectical trap that they've created and trying to hit the source. Sachki would say it's the crystal staircase or the crystal millennium kingdom on the moon. It's there. It's there if we want to see it. It's there if we want to understand it. It's there if we want to know it. And it doesn't require their games. That's what I don't. That's what I'm not diminishing Tracy in any way, but that's what I don't like about channeling. It's because it's such an unknown of unknowns.
Yeah. And
Like, what are you listening to? What are you doing? Are you thinking about what they're telling you, like when you're doing it? Are you tapped out? Are you not? looking at it in multiple angles, multiple layers? Are you just following like a rote script? Because I think that that is where people get into traps with lower spirits, specifically goetic spirits, where they treat them as this all-knowing entity.
Mighty being whenever they're on the lower
Yes,
rung.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I don't think we should treat angels as the same as God either. So I'm not I'm both sidesing or saying
Right.
one is right. God is God, and God is really a pristine consciousness, clean perception of the day and the night sky. It's without clouds. It's just clear, totally clear. And so that's what God is. That's really what God is. Anything that you listen to is going to have a cloud or light that is not
Or
entirely
fog,
true,
as you would say.
or a fog of smoke. Exactly, it would be very delusory. I would caution people that spirits are not necessarily what you think they are. Yes, I'm sure that your grandma is really nice and all that, and it does happen. I'm not diminishing those experiences, but do not hold those experiences too close, because that in the act of remembering that in and of itself can be a delusion.
Yeah. Very true, very true. And even to just to tie off of what we were just on is the right pillar, left pillar, secret third. What I would say is the big secret, at least what I have written here, is the big secret of Western esoterics is constantly trying to balance these two great powers, these two great conflicting powers,
Mm.
and tap into both without destroying themselves. So this is where I see that the secret third pillar, and where I see the misstep that many people make once they confront this secret third pillar is that they now realize they can be the ones controlling the pawns, and they start to interact with the board not as someone on the board, but as the observers above the board moving the pieces. And that's where I see a lot of the um, I guess a lot of the negatives come about this, because you'll have some, very great individuals, researchers that get so involved in all this stuff, and they start to realize, oh wait, I could actually start being a game master. I could start controlling the board, and they think that that's personally, I don't think that's the correct manner. I think the correct manner is to stay off the board
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
demystify the board.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well said. I totally agree with that. I think that the trap is the game itself. The
Yes.
trap is to play, but it's not to not know what it is.
Yeah,
So I
it's not knowing how the game is played. It's understanding how the game is played so that you could explain it to the people that are playing the game how they're losing and why they're not even meant to win.
I agree. I think that's really well said. But I see it. I see people's PFP. I know that when people want to complain about Kabbalah or whatever, and then they have it in it, I find that very hypocritical. I find you're being dishonest to your audience. If you're complaining about it, then why are you doing it?
Right.
Whereas I try and present it, yeah, they are doing it. They are fucking doing it. It's fucking cool. Like, not cool as in they're doing it, but
It's
these are the
interesting.
ways to understand. Yeah, it's not about mystifying. I don't like that. And I hate that about astrology Twitter, especially because they tend to mystify this idea of the planets. Lilith and Samael.
Mhm.
Interestingly, Samael is sometimes given as the angel of Mars. There's something really interesting with him, and he's considered to be the left-handed angel of God. He's very ferocious, and he can also be considered the poisoner. This is all at the behest of God, right? A Jewish angelology. He really is of God. Even though that they are positioning him in this anti-cosmic role with Lilith, who's not especially in a Himalayan way, she's not really anti-cosmic. She is destructive. And once you understand that, you can turn your thinking and see that, okay, she doing this and what is her function and why. We're talking about perception. We're talking about information management, really, narrative management.
Literally, that is what it is. That is what magic is in its utmost sense. It is managing the information that is perceived by the individual to get them to react or act in a certain manner.
The thing with Tracy's work that I find it very illuminating in some ways, because I think that she's speaking to an audience that is more ready to
Yeah.
grasp with the concepts. And even though she's writing for people who may not at face value understand them. A lot of people aren't necessarily illuminists or whatever. They're not, they're not Rosicrucian minded, or they're not interested in magic or whatever, but they're picking up these ideas and they're engaging with them. But in the course of her writing, I do think that there is something also illuminant in it. It's that she's explaining it as it is, but it's about your perspective of how you're perceiving what she's saying.
Yeah, because she definitely, I would say that she put out some very potent information, and the potency could be utilized in both ways.
Her work reflects that, because if you're a magician, you're really writing from the perspective of the moon. That's your metaphysical position, where you're quietly illuminating things. Whereas the sun is blazing and it's so effulgent that you can't really see past the outer layer.
That's an interesting way to phrase it. I could see that, yeah. One's more subtle.
One's more subtle. You're hiding knowledge or death in your words, but you're not hiding it on purpose. You're letting it sit there and just be. And for those who perceive it, they can understand it, and those who don't, it like the apple metaphor, it plants a seed in their mind. Maybe they won't understand it right now. Maybe it will take 10 years, but it will bloom eventually. I did have time to think about how I reacted to the material. There was a week, Zach, I'm just being honest with you, where, especially when we did the part 2 about the talking heads, which you get into more in the second book, it really freaked me out at first. But then I really thought, embrace this from a magical perspective. Understand it in a wisdom science way. What are they talking about? Constructs. Okay, this is a very common idea. The idea of the tulpa is said to come from Tibetan Buddhism. Now, whether it does or not, that it's probably a theosophical idea of that. But we do have parallel concepts. So I just thought of it from that angle and then deconstructed it, and it was not so scary. Because whether we believe it's true or not true doesn't matter. But I can understand from my exposure to esoteric literature what they're talking about. So it demystifies it, and it made it a lot less scary. And if they're really dumb enough to take full-on social rituals, state rituals from a talking head or an AI or anything that's a construct, they're not as smart as they think they are.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I could see that too, is like a lot of what we discussed in the second part, I would say, is it could be a LARP, this could all be nonsense fiction that was put out for the public to digest. But my point is, why was it put out? And there has to be a reason for it, for this stuff to go on. That I think that it should be at least archived, so that maybe later down the line people would come back and at least see how the understanding was at the time of what was going on. Because, like you were saying, is like lots of these different things that are going on, social developments that are going on, we don't actually know who's manning these things, who's conditioning people to act in certain ways. You can only, like I said earlier, you can only see the fruits of the labor after the fact. So you kind of have to wait to see how everything kind of settles out before you can actually start dissecting what led to it getting that way.
I will say this about Tracy, aside from me just liking her, just because I'm now exposed to her work through you and through Dan. But I have to say that a lot of other people liked her as well. A lot of other people. I got maybe 20, 25 DMs on Instagram, which I'm not even very active on, in regards to saying I was really great friends with Tracy. We were email friends for like this amount of years, and it was never a short time. It was always 5 or 6 years. And multiple other people would say just what a great researcher she was and just what a great person she was. And then on Twitter, I got dozens of inquiries when I was dropping the series, honestly. And it was really surprising to me, but also edifying, obviously, that you came to me and I was, let's record this because this is so great. And I didn't really have any idea of her popularity. So I just think there's something to be said about someone who leaves a legacy that is, for the most part, positive.
I would say that there is a slight mystical legacy to her to certain people. I feel like there definitely are certain groups that are trying to mystify her and hold her as like a
100%.
deity figure, which I mean, you can do that. I don't necessarily agree with it because I think that, she was a human just like anybody else, even if she had these channelings and such, speaking with Baphomet and Cain, I think it's certainly she should be revered for having the courage to at least look into these things and experiment with these things, but that doesn't mean that you should be held as a better, I guess.
I think this is an important thing to say, is that you have that spark of curiosity about someone else's like magical work. And I wouldn't necessarily do that, but that is really interesting. And I think revere is the right word. And I don't seek to do that at all. I just think that I do get a little bit like that, even with Donald J. Trump. Sometimes I get that with his power. He hasn't been doing it lately, but he used to do it a lot. And I could always tell. And this is actually rather impressive.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that yeah, revere would be a decent word for it. I would say stay away from deification or
Yeah.
idolization.
You're totally right. The hero is ourselves. I
Mhm.
always, and I believe that personally.
Yeah, you are the hero of your own story.
Yes, exactly. And then Tracy's not the hero of your story, not you, but anyone listening.
Anyone listening, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the Templars in this.
Exactly.
We don't want to channel what are possibly sounds very Roman cults of the ancestors, the late Roman Empire. People was, oh, they were pagan, but they really deified themselves. And
Yeah, I would say a lot of Mithraism. I think that was prevalent at the time, but then again, I could be completely off.
because the contract, that's really the essence of at least the Iranian Mithraism. I know that the Greek Mithraism was different. I acknowledge that, but at least in the Iranian idea, Mithras is really the contract. It's really the binding oath that you say. So it's a very important, if you want to call it a deity, it's a very important deity because it binds the oath of the brotherhood or the loyalty vow or whatever it is. Palo Mayombe, which is one of the African syncretic religions from Cuba, they do this thing where they chain a ghost to a Naganga, a spirit pot. It's a big black cauldron, and they have to feed it blood. And then they will send the spirit out on jobs. So in my way of thinking, I'm not sure what kind of spirits they are, but it seems to me they are more worldly or lower spirits because those things that require constant nourishment, that's something that you're asking for a worldly thing. If you're signing a blood oath, yes, there are biblical allusions to that, but I think it has a totally different meaning. And I think that what they're talking about is really this kind of bloodline covenant.
Well, and that's also where I was saying this is a repeating cycle of self-abuse.
You'll come back and do part 2 and we'll talk about the other material, right?
I'm about it. I'm about it.
Okay, so Zach, why don't you? You're such a funny dude. Okay, so plug at least Twitter and a little of what we're gonna talk about next time.
I'm Zachary Shumar, Twitter or X, the everything app. The next one I had titled The Cappy Inquiry. So what the Cappy Inquiry would be discussing is Tracy and Isaac Cappy's communication / referencing of each other that they would have and different groups that they were, supposedly getting involved with. And what I found this very interesting was I guess I'll save it for the next one, but to see how there was a right wing and a left wing psyop both being utilized for a main goal at the end that really, really took me back and made me think that, oh, this actually does need looking over and analyzing a little bit further because there was something bigger going on there that I probably can't figure it out on my own. I can only just, put certain puzzle pieces on the table and try to let other people figure out where all the other puzzle pieces fit.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. Thank you, Zach. I hope you're happy with this one. I think it'll be really good.
Have a nice day, buddy.
You too.
Vegeta, thanks.
For what? I should be thanking you, Kakarot.
Nah, what do you mean? I loved every minute. Goodbye, my friend.